survey module. So we would ask that you take a few moments to click on that survey to provide us with your feedback on this session. Also, you may have received a prompt when you first logged in regarding a file transfer. Dave Rue, who will be our first presenter today, will be talking about and pointing you to some of those resources. If you wanted to download those resources during the session, there is a tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Those resources will also be provided in the follow-up email to you, and there will also be a slide that includes several links to those resources. So moving to our session, just to give you a little bit of a sense of our webinar format for today, we're going to spend about 40 minutes on presentations. I've talked to you a little bit about our service center. Next, we're going to transition to Dan Abreu, who works here at Policy Research Associates. And then after that, we'll go to Michael Little, who's based at the Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health, and will speak about his work as a peer specialist coordinator. At the end of the session, we'll have questions and answers for between 15 to 20 minutes. What we would ask you to do is that you type your questions into the question and answer panel, and we will get to as many of those questions as we're able to at the end of the session. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate that the link for the webinar archive will be sent to all registrants by early next week. Okay. I'm going to transition to Dan Abreu, who is a Senior Project Associate at Policy Research Associates, and he serves as a Senior Technical Assistance Specialist for the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration's GAIN Center for Behavioral Health and Justice Transformation. He's also affiliated with our service center, the Service Members, Veterans, and Their Families Technical Assistance Center. Any of you on the phone may have worked with him in the past. I'm going to transition it over to Dan. Welcome.
Thank you, Michelle, and it's a pleasure to be able to be speaking to you this afternoon, along with my colleague, Michael Little. So I'm going to start with the first question that we generally get asked, or it eventually will get asked when we're working with communities to develop diversion programs, and specifically diversion programs for veterans, is why should veterans get special handling? Why should we do special things for them? And it's not that we are developing diversion programs for veterans because of their status. We do it because of veterans, because of their unique military experience, various and unique treatment needs and service needs. And that if those needs aren't specifically addressed, what we'll find is that there will be ongoing recidivism and the cycle will keep on going. And they certainly have specific behavioral health needs, which we'll talk more about later in this presentation. Another reason why it's important to focus on veterans is there's a lag in symptoms returning from deployment. It might be weeks, months, and years before symptoms get bad enough so that they attract attention or people start to seek help. And often the first point of intervention can often be with law enforcement, whether it's the police or because of arrest in the courts. And if the courts and the justice system are prepared to identify and respond, you can stop the cycle of recidivism and crisis-oriented interventions. And then the reason, of course, is that experience is showing that by engaging veterans, paying attention to military culture issues and their specific needs, you'll get better outcomes. Next. There are some important national resources if you're thinking about developing diversion programs for veterans, including veterans courts, that you should be aware of. First, I'd like to mention is the Justice for Vets website. It's operated by the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, and it's a resource, a national resource for communities developing veteran strategies, veteran diversion strategies. On their websites, you'll find a media toolkit, how to engage the media in your initiatives. You'll find resources for developing mentor programs, including policy manuals and training guides. You'll find sample policy and procedures from other veterans courts. The Justice for Vets website also, the Justice for Vets organization also provides technical assistance, allowing court planning teams to come to a site for a full week of training. There's no solicitation available right now, but if you go to their website, you can apply, and there is a waiting list for these technical assist events. Another technical assistance event you'll find is there are mentor court sites. So the technical assistance is provided, bring your planning team to an operating court so that you can meet with the Veterans Court team and get some guidance in developing your own programs. So again, they're an essential resource for any community looking to develop the programs. Another resource they'll want to be aware of is the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs Veterans Justice Outreach Program page. I think probably most of you are familiar with the Veterans Justice Outreach Program. For those of you who aren't, back in 2010, really, the VA really was proactive about beginning to work with veterans who became justice involved, and they developed a Veterans Justice Outreach Program, and policy research was involved with the VA in helping to train the initial cohort of Veterans Justice Outreach Program coordinators. And they're placed at each of the 104 VA hospitals. Some VA hospitals have more than one Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinator, and they've been invaluable to communities developing their veterans initiatives. One disclaimer with the Veterans Justice Outreach folks is they have a large geographic area that they cover, often multiple counties. And if much of their time is taken up in the Veterans Court, then their time allotted to get to some of the outlying counties be compromised. But in the work that we do in communities, we insist that they're invited, they're always helpful, they always make time, and they always have good suggestions for improving programs and providing better access to the VA hospitals. Next slide. To find, you're not familiar with who your VJOs are, you can go to the link on the website, and this is an example of that you'll find, for example, from Alabama, the Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinators in the state of Alabama. Next slide. Another resource which was really just recently published, a white paper that was done by the National Institute of Corrections, which is a review of veterans courts. And it's not so much research as much as it is anecdotes and testimonies from leaders in the field about the effectiveness of programs, veterans court programs, about some personal stories of people who have gone through the program, and also program development strategies. You'll see articles in there from Judge Carter from Houston Veterans Court, Judge Russell, who had the initial Veterans Court in Buffalo, Jack O'Connor, who's the mentor court coordinator in Buffalo, and also Melissa Fitzgerald, who's the Senior Director of Justice for Vets. So again, very valuable resource, and it's available, it'll be available for download after this webinar. Next slide. On any given day, there's about 8% of the U.S. population are vets, and the prevalence of in jail and prison is about what the general population. So they're not overrepresented necessarily in the population, and that number has been going down over the past several years. However, look at the growth in veterans courts since 2004, and this data comes from a document you can download from the VA website. I think we also have it available for transfer. Inventory that was done by the VA of veterans courts. And so you can see that currently there are about 350 courts through 2014 identified. The remarkable thing, though, is if you look at the lower line, is that about 70 courts a year are going up. So you might prorate going through 2016 that there could be as many as 500 veterans courts operating or in planning stages right now. So there continues to be, I think, a need to develop specialized responses for veterans. And to give you some idea of context, number of mental health courts are somewhere between 300 and 400. We talked about the veterans court data, and the drug court data has over 1,400 specialty courts. Now this slide represents a Diversion Trauma Recovery Initiative by SAMHSA. So the National Gain Center was the technical assistance to 13 states. They got money from SAMHSA to develop jail diversion programs in their states. And so some of the information that I'll be talking about will is a result of initiative, and especially the data. When I get to the data about people who participated in these programs and what that tells us about the characteristics of veterans, that'll be data that we derive from the initiative. I want to give you, in thinking about your strategies for developing veterans justice interventions, a planning paradigm, which we call a sequential intercept model, was developed by Dr. Mark Munitz and Dr. Patty Griffin. Dr. Munitz, a psychiatrist out of Ohio, and Patty Griffin, a psychologist out of Pennsylvania, who developed the model along with the National Gain Center. What the model does is that it presumes that people move through the criminal justice system in predictable ways, and that the model identifies specific intercept points that if there's an engagement strategy, you can bring a behavioral health response into the justice system at these intercept points, then you can get prompt access to treatment, there's opportunities for diversion and timely movement through the justice system, and then the important part, linkage to community resources. For those of you wanting to learn more about the sequential intercept model, this book was just published last year, which is a comprehensive review of various diversion strategies across the 5 intercepts. When we go into a community, very often communities will have diversion and reentry programs, but they tend to work in silos and don't necessarily communicate with one another, and communities won't necessarily have an overview of how their criminal justice system is operating and what their partnerships look like. What the sequential intercept model does is it helps communities come together to look strategically across the intercepts about to at the earliest possible instance to either prevent entrance into the justice system or to minimize penetration into the justice system. And we've used this model to help communities understand how veterans get processed through the justice system. So in Intercept 1, this is where we're talking about police interaction, and police get involved in 2 ways. First, very often police respond to non-criminal events. They respond to suicide attempts, they respond to family disturbance calls, they'll respond to complaints from business people, homeless people in the streets. But unless the police have good resources and to refer to, very often these offenses can escalate into an arrest incident. And the second when police get involved is sometimes there are low-level charges that they'll come across. They are able to identify certain somebody has a mental illness and will divert somebody, would rather not arrest that person. But again, unless there's resources and partnerships, then there would be an arrest. So this is an example of a police officer intervention. Back in 2009, the Gaines Center put on a panel at the Atlanta Crisis Intervention Team Conference. And we talked about PTSD and the manifestations of PTSD as they might occur to a police officer. 2 weeks after that panel, this police officer from Florida sent us this email, and I'm going to summarize quickly here, that when she returned from the conference, she came across somebody who was driving recklessly, which she learned could be manifestation of PTSD in a veteran. The person was angry, and she was able to ask if the person had served in the military. Just by asking that question, it began to de-escalate and was able to calm the person down and avoid an arrest. She also asked the second question that she learned was, do you have a weapon? He said that he did. She retrieved the weapon, and he said, please keep that weapon until it's safe for me to have it. She called his wife to the scene, take him home, and followed up to make sure he got the services. So again, right at the beginning of the justice system involvement, it's important to understand veteran issues so that there can be quick response. Next slide. The next Intercept is Intercept 2. So this is where there's been an arrest, and then generally in most communities, within 24 hours, there's an arraignment. There's an opportunity, again, to divert veterans at arraignment, but it's probably one of the most difficult intercepts to do diversion in, because there's generally a high volume of people in arraignment courts. There's very little time to do the identification and screening, and there's lack of partnerships and service availability at arraignment. But I spend a little time on this because it's important. It's an important and difficult intercept. The reason it's important is that there's data that's coming out of Kentucky now that shows that if even incarcerating somebody for as few as somebody who's a low or moderate risk, incarcerating them for as little as 2 to 3 days, the risk of the rate of recidivism will increase both before they get to trial and after the case is resolved. So you really want to make sure that you're not sending the wrong people to jail needlessly when it's actually going to make outcomes worse. We've identified some key elements for diverting at arraignment court. And this monograph is available that you see here on the SAMHSA website. The key elements are identification and screening. You can't, to have those mechanisms in place, to have a clinician in the court who can, number one, do the assessment once somebody is screened, but number two, to actually leave the court with the person and begin the engagement with services immediately. Third, recovery-based engagement is most successful, which means that utilization of peers, somebody who's had experience similar to who had justice experience, or in the case of veterans, somebody who's had military experience who can begin to work with the person immediately. And the fourth element is that there's proportional response. So if people are going to be released at arraignment, generally they're lower level charges. So the courts can't expect to be able to supervise somebody for 6 months to a year. It's generally going to be rather short periods of supervision contingent on showing up for a few behavioral health appointments. And then with heavy emphasis on engagement, people will stay involved in their treatment. Some of the key partners in arraignment could be the public defenders. Many public defenders will have social workers that work with them and can do the screening. Pretrial services is important, as are the VJOs. Some screening tools here would be the brief mental health screen, which is available off the SAMHSA website. It can be used by pretrial probation. It can be used by public defenders to help identify people with mental illness. Also, there's on the left, the fact sheet on the proper way to screen for veterans in the justice system. The question that's asked, had served in the military, and not the veterans yes/no box, but have you served in the military? It's more likely to be endorsed positively by veterans. Also, for screening is something that was developed by the VA, the Veterans Reentry Search Service, where prison jails and courts can match their databases to a Department of Defense website to help identify veterans. That are doing that are able to increase identification of veterans by 30%. Next slide. So we're in Intercept 3, and this is where we're talking about veterans courts and specialty courts. The Justice for Vets have identified key components of a veterans court. I'm not going to go through all 10 of these because, number one, because you can read, number two, because you can download these from the Justice for Vets website, number three, because Michael in his presentation is going to be talking about these components in his presentation of the Philadelphia Treatment Court. I do want to say, though, that go to the what was that? Previous slide. So number 5, I do want to draw your attention to the abstinence piece, because what we're seeing now with the opioid crisis is that many courts are beginning to allow medication-assisted treatment as part of their strategies. Some courts have preferred abstinence only, but again, in certain circumstances, you might want to consider allowing medication-assisted treatment. It saves lives. It's an evidence-based practice. And next slide. And I'll point out number 10. I think that you're going to be developing your program and identifying your partners, but I think what you're going to see is that the needs are quite broad. Employment is a huge issue when you want to have employment partnerships, and many of the veterans that you see will have multitude of legal issues. They'll have custody issues with their family or divorce. They'll have prior criminal offenses or maybe traffic fines that have to be addressed. So you may want to partner with legal services or law schools to address some of those issues. Next slide. Veterans court criteria will vary. Some of it's mandated by state law, but others discretionary. I won't go through all of these in the interest of time. Well, under the legal column, looking at charge exclusions, for example, most courts won't allow people who have had capital crimes or there's been gratuitous violence. But veterans, you'll see domestic violence charges, you'll see DUI charges, and you'll see weapons charges, and you'll have to consider how you're going to address some of these issues with your veterans. If you do decide to address domestic violence charges, please involve your victim advocate groups so that their concerns would be heard and their input can be sought. So quickly, I'm going to go through some of the data that was assembled by the Advocates for Human Potential, which did the evaluation. The characteristics of the veterans that came through the 13 sites show high rates of trauma. A lot of the trauma that was identified was before they were in the military, before age 18. So what you'll find is that your participants have current trauma that they are facing. As you can see, 60% had trauma within the last 12 months. Half of the veterans that participated in the program had combat experience. If they did have combat experience, then 96% were exposed to military trauma, and we also saw rates of MST. There also was significant prior criminal history, which again speaks to the rationale of developing diversion programs as early as possible to prevent further criminal justice involvement. Again, within the JDTR program, over 50% served in Iraq. There's Persian Gulf War participation, and there are still Vietnam veterans that you'll see 65% had honorable discharges, and over 92% of that cohort were eligible for VA services. Only 8% had dishonorable discharges. So most of the people will be eligible for VA services that you work with. The last Intercept is Intercept 5, and this is a diversion intercept also. This is where people, we know that people with mental health problems are more likely to violate probation, and so courts are, once probation is violated, if you're a veteran, they might go to a veterans court for additional supervision and military-specific interventions. In of time, I'm going to stop here, but I will say in conclusion that, so two slides, one more, and again, that probation is a significant partner in developing your programs. What we learned is, in working with those 13 states, these are the principles to consider in developing your diversion strategies. It's important to screen, have you served in the military across all your systems, and train around those issues across the criminal justice system, but also with your behavioral health partners. You saw the high prevalence of trauma. It's important to be trauma-focused and to ensure that there are trauma-specific treatments. Broad clinical criteria should be considered. Peers are essential to the success of your programs. These are veterans, peers, and mentor programs. The VA can't do this alone for a lot of reasons. You're going to have to rely on community-based providers. In addition to the VA, in some instances, veterans living in rural communities won't be able to access VA services in a timely way, or there may be capacity issues at certain VAs, or the veterans simply might prefer to go to a community-based partner. Be flexible with your charges, minimize collateral sanctions. A felony conviction can create barriers to employment and housing. And lastly, include the veterans in choosing the best interventions. Thank you.
Thank you much, Dan. And I appreciate all the stress that Dan placed on the importance of collaboration. That's really at the centerpiece of our work at the SMVF TA Center, and I think Dan really stressed how this model and this work can really be successful when there's opportunities for collaboration and when you explore opportunities for collaboration. So now we're going to transition over to our next presenter, who's Michael Little, who is a Forensics Peer Specialist Coordinator at the Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health. As you saw from his biography, he has used his personal experience and now translates that into his work. And so now, Michael, we're going to turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. He's, as you know, is in Philadelphia Veterans Court. You know, the court's run by Judge Dugan. He is a veteran himself. But one thing, can they hear me? Can I?
You're being heard.
Okay, I'm sure. Next slide. Here's some contact information for the Philadelphia Veterans Court that's run by Honorable Patrick Dugan. He himself is a former Marine. Next slide. Okay. Here are some of the components of Veteran Court. And one of the things is getting individuals, both male and female, to understand that they have some behavioral health challenges, mental health challenges, self-use challenges. But getting treatment effectively is one of the goals for the Veterans Court. Understanding that there are experiences prior to them even serving in the military, and understanding that without the support promotions, mentor programs, and just positive people, many of these challenges will go unaddressed and become, I want to say, negative influences within their lives. Additional components. One is as people are in the program, some people go to court every week. Some people go in different weeks. It really depends on the phase that individuals are, and it depends on how structured their day is towards treatment, as well as if they may be working. One of the things is there's going to be probation and parole that are involved in this. There are going to be frequent and random drug and alcohol testing, which is going to be reported. They have case managers depending on what kind of outpatient treatment they're receiving, and they're at the end of the day, they must follow all the rules of probation and parole to stay in Veterans Court. The Veteran Peer Mentoring Program is exactly what it talks about. It's about being able to mentor. All of these mentors are individuals, veterans who have had prior history in the military, and many of them have also gone through the program, so they kind of understand exactly what it takes to complete the program. They understand the challenges, the ups and downs that people will endure during this program. They come from all types of military backgrounds, Vietnam, Korea, Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, during Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. One of these things with the peer mentoring program also is that peers themselves understand each other. In Philadelphia, there are currently 5 mentors, 4 women and 1 woman that assist the veterans with transitioning, understanding what it takes and explaining to them about medication compliance, understanding that you have to go to see your probation officer, understanding that there will be frequent and random urinalysis, understanding that there will be treatment goals that each one will be given prior to completing the program, and that they have to follow these directions. Oftentimes, many of the combat veterans, as well as non-combat veterans, comply with all the rules and regulations because they're veterans and they want to be honorable and want to listen and pay respect to a program that is helping them get their lives back on track. Also, with the peer mentoring program, it allows individuals to improve their lives and get a new beginning. Understanding that treatment is part of their comprehensive program, and that they have to be able to get acquainted with not just the peer mentors, but also their treatment providers. And as a veteran peer, the person understands the legal ramifications, the treatment goals, the treatment comprehensive plans, and unique components of the veterans work. The mentors themselves give personal experiences, provide, personal advice. A mentor, when I say advice, they talk about things that has worked for them, things that have not worked for them, and offer assistance and hopefully discover a better way of life for individuals. Now, one of the things we always talk about, there's no set-cutter approach to being a veteran peer mentor. Each person has a unique experience. Each person has a unique way to get a better understanding and a better feel for one of the people that they give services to. Next. Here's the information which guys will be able to read yourself. Next slide. The diversion court. One of the things is with the diversion court, it's really a unique experience because prior to court, there's this pre-screening before, which gives the individuals in the courtroom, the DA, the assistant district attorney, the peer mentors, the certified peer specialists, and the judge a chance to talk about treatment. One of the things is I think that is pushed with Veterans Court in Philadelphia is understanding that there are going to be treatment and treatment goals that individuals have to follow. Also, we during that time, if people are not being compliant, there will be certain sanctions that they talk about. I say sanctions, it's to divert from incarceration, it's divert from jail time. So sanctions could be spending more time in the courtroom, reporting as opposed to one. It might be every 3 weeks, it might be every 2 weeks, it may be every week. It really depends on the severity of the sanction and the non-compliance of that particular veteran. Also, there are distinguished veterans also who are very compliant to their treatment goals. They're very compliant to the urinalysis, meaning they don't come up positive for urinalysis, and following all the rules of probation or parole. And one of the things that's also talked about, so, one of the goals is if a person may have 2 years of probation, they talk about lessening that time because that person's compliant. Sanction also could be essays that could be written by some of the veterans. Also, there may be time called the penalty box where a veteran will have to stay all day in treatment court. There also would be, one of the sanctions could be time added on to their sentence. And the last resort, after all these things aren't working and they're non-compliant, they have some jail time. But that's not seen a lot. Next slide. How long will it be involved in Veterans Program? Well, as I said before, the goal is 6 to 12 months. But some people, depending on their compliance, stay a little longer. The key is to have people successfully complete the program. Complete the program also consists of talking to treatment providers, talking to the peer mentors, talking to certified peer specialists that is working in the court, talking to each one of the court liaisons, as well as the judge, to see if this particular person, how long will he be actually in the program. One is also, it does talk about the severity of the charges that an individual has. One of the things, it's really a case-by-case basis. Some of the charges that I have seen in Veterans Court that have been difficult to represent and get into Veterans Court are sexual charges and arson. One of the things is that each person has its case-by-case, and realistically is no cookie-cutter approach to this particular way for a person to get into Veterans Court. The graduation, after they are compliant and after they can complete all their treatment goals, one of the things that I've always seen is the time pretzels and water ice. There's also a lot of congratulations and accommodations, verbal encouragement towards many of these graduating veterans. Some of the rules of Veterans Court also is, there's no drug use. If not prescribed, it's illegal. One of the things is you must be able to appear in court on scheduled time. You have an individualized treatment plan that you have to be able to say that, you know, this is working for me. There's sometimes you have to tweak treatment plans, and that's about communicating with your clinician, handling all your appointments with your case managers, probation and parole officers, and all support services. Each veteran is responsible for being on time for all appointments throughout this Veterans Court. Next slide. Sometimes also the judge wants you to follow the orders and recommendations of Veterans Treatment Court. There are sometimes individuals who feel as though the goals and the guidelines and recommendations are maybe a little bit stringent, but where that peer mentoring comes in to talk to assist the individual trying to transition to a new way of life, a new way of thinking. Oftentimes, you know, I talk about having cognitive behavioral therapy in some of the talks and talking about personal experiences that individuals have had to assist them with the transition of changing the thought process. What thought processes are changed, attitudes, behaviors can change, and many of the mentors, as I said earlier, have gone through the program and assisted them, talking about how they develop better thinking skills and are more proactive and pro-social in their behavior. While treatment court, and the whole goal is taking those same attitudes and behaviors and beliefs that change once treatment court has been completed. Next slide. Veterans Court phases. You have orientation, introduction, assessment, and assimilation. And you know, during that orientation, you'll be able to meet your probation officer. You'll meet your attorney. You'll talk with your attorney. You'll be assessed, and all these assessments and evaluations will be brought up in your pre-screening, and will be monitored closely by the treatment team and reported weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, depending on your compliance with the judge. The orientation phase, which we call phase 1, your plan is developed. Your treatment team plan is developed. And on that treatment team plan, you are a part of development. One of the things is, if you are part of that as a veteran, you have to buy in to your treatment goals, as opposed to somebody telling you what you need to do. Each person has different goals. Some goals may be family reunification. Some goals may be domestic violence counseling. Some might be finance, anger management, exercise, psychotherapy. Some people may be trying to go back and get their GED, and just learning how to be a better parent. Because oftentimes we talk about trauma. Many people have gone through traumatic experiences growing up and are learning new ways to be parents. Phase 2 is a stabilization phase. Your treatment goals are updated. A team has identified treatment goals and objectives. You're part of that. You're being compliant. You're into meetings, focusing on what areas you need, what you're having challenges with, and you're focusing on what has been stressful to you and what you need to do to decrease some of that stress. When you decrease stress, you feel better and you're more compliant with your day-to-day treatment goals. Now, phase 3 is the reintegration phase. Recovery process. Are things working for you? Are you still being compliant with being your random urinalysis? Are you abstinence from drugs? During this time, your probation officer, your case manager, all these people are part of your support team, as well as your veteran peer mentor, because, you know, one of the things is we try to develop relationships and understand that the mentor as well as the probation officer are part of your support team and are part of your staff and part of your success rate. If our understanding that these people are here to help you as opposed to hurt you, your treatment phase is much more smoother, and your transition is better during drug treatment court as well as veterans court. Next slide. Phase. This is your graduation phase. This is successful transition to society. If had some DUIs, those DUIs, during treatment in court, are wiped off your record. The goal is for you to successfully complete. You have a structured lifestyle. You're more coherent of your own needs, and with more so, you learn how to be a productive member of society. You've achieved your treatment goals. You're talking about continuing your therapy, being a better person. You're being a better father and a husband. Learn some parenting skills, and you've been just compliant throughout the Veterans Court program phases. Next slide. Multi-Service Center in Philadelphia. Here's the address. And this is where veterans can go, job training, resume writing, benefits counseling, as well as getting navigated to other social events, outpatient treatment that people may need, as well as people's children. Children of vets also are able to get some resources from the Veterans Multi-Service Center. Next. That concludes my part of it. I want to thank everybody for attending, and I guess we're opening up now for questions.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
What we want to do now is take a few moments and have some questions and answers, field some questions and answers. Can you go to the next slide? So one of our questions is directed for Dan, and the question relates to VJOs and whether it's mandatory to have a VJO in conjunction with the Veterans Treatment Court, or is that an option?
Good question. So, as I mentioned, the VJOs have broad responsibility, geographic areas, and they may have multiple veterans courts. I think you want them involved certainly in the planning, and you want to have an idea of what their capacity is to respond, because the worst thing that you can do in setting up any program is have unrealistic expectations of each other. So I would certainly contact your VJO. It helps for help planning your court, and then work on how they'll interact with your court moving forward.
The next question is for both Dan and Michael. Can you speak to what are the mentor/core roles and the importance to the success of the reduction in recidivism?
I'll begin to try to answer that. The mentors, they've had lived experience, and many of them have gone through treatment court themselves and successfully completed it. So, and not all of them have been compliant during that process. So to talk about their lived experience, they're able to talk about compliance and their challenges, ups and downs, while in Veterans Court, personal challenges, both employment-wise, mental health-wise, and family-wise, and just build a better relationship with individuals so that way they can transition comfortably while in a Veterans Treatment Court.
And I want to follow up and expand a little bit, Michael. So I want to distinguish between Veterans Court mentors and Veterans Court specialists who would be getting paid to work veterans and be part of the Veterans Court team. The mentors is developed really through Judge Russell's court, and really part of the Veterans Court model now are a volunteer group of veterans who may or may not have had criminal justice experience, and frequently they do not, but they have military experience. And so Jack O'Connor, again, you go to the Justice for Vets website, he has a how-to of developing that mentor program. I might be exaggerating this a little bit. I think he might have up to 100 mentors that rotate in depending on their availability. The peer specialist, on the other hand, would be a veteran who has a certification or is employed as a peer specialist as part of a treatment team. Some states have a subspecialty now as of a peer specialist with a veteran certification. So one's a paid position, one's a volunteer position. One has had justice experience and mental health experience, one not necessarily.
Dan and Michael, and the next question actually ties to this as well. Do the volunteer peer mentors in Michael's program, do you receive training, and who provides the training? And the second part of the question is, are there veteran treatment courts that pay their peer mentors versus volunteering? So do you want to answer the first part of that?
Well, as Dan had said, the mentors are volunteers in Philadelphia, and there are currently no financial gains mentoring. But the peer specialists, they do get paid. They not only go to court, they go to treatment facilities, providers. They go to homes and assist individuals. But one of the things is, as a mentor, a person in Philadelphia has a love for veterans and want to see them succeed in productive lives. And follow, compliance rules of the courts as well as, the law.
Thank you, Mike. Did you have anything you want to add? Okay. The next question is, how can a veteran become a peer mentor? Michael, do you want to speak to your program?
Yeah, in Philadelphia, it's an application process. You want to become a mentor. And you send your application in, it's reviewed, you come in, you will get an interview, and it's as simple as that. You'll go in front of the coordinator for the Veterans Court, you'll go in front of the district attorney, and you go in front of the peer mentor also during the process.
One other strategy might be, if you're a veteran in a community and you're not aware of whether or not your community has a veterans court, one of the documents available for download is that veterans court inventory. In that inventory is a list of veterans court by state as well as contact information. So you can see where your veterans courts are in your community and initial contact and see if there's they mentor. Not all courts do, but not all courts. You never know, if you call, maybe they'll start one and put you in charge of it.
Thank you, Dan and Michael. Okay, another question is from a participant who their county is considering opening a veterans court, but they'll be incorporating it into the standard adult treatment court program, and she was interested in learning a little bit about some of the models that have done something similar.
So I'll start, Michael. As it relates to Philly, you can comment. So on volume and resources, courts have different strategies. So some are veterans courts, and they handle the caseload. But oftentimes they'll be established within a drug court, or they'll be established within a mental health court or treatment court as a separate docket when court meets. The programs can look differently. So if it's within a drug court, they're more focused on substance abuse than mental health. On the other hand, if it's within a mental health court docket, sometimes then the focus would be more on health issues and people with more symptoms. And so sometimes you get a difficulty matching the populations well. But there are different strategies depending on, like I said, resources and judicial availability.
Thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more question before we end the session. And this question is for Michael. The participant was asking what type of staff are available in Philadelphia, for example, benefits specialists, social workers, et cetera. Can you just talk about that for a minute, Michael?
Well, you know, in Veterans Court, all the veterans are directed by the VJO to the Veterans Administration Building, where they go through social workers. There are in court, you know, of course, there's a DA. You know, one of the things with the treatment team, you have licensed clinical individuals. You have peer specialists. You have the peer mentors, and all of the individuals within the court's the information.
Terrific, Michael. And actually, I'm going to squeeze one more question in, and I think I can direct this to Dan. Have any of these ideas been utilized in helping veterans who are already incarcerated?
Well, if they're pre-trial, obviously, then they'd still have the opportunity to take advantage of a diversion program if they were referred. If they're sentenced and they're coming out of jail or prison, and this especially for prisons, the VA has a health care for reentry veteran specialist that will go into the prisons and help with reentry for veterans. And so, and you can find that information on the VA website about who the healthcare for reentry veteran specialists are. Your VJO would also know, since they may share an office next to each other. For adults, if they haven't been referred to a veterans court and they're coming out of jail, sometimes the VJOs will help with those folks also. Although there won't be as much of a hands-on because their focus really is on the diversion. But they can be helpful in terms of identifying resources and making the connections to the VA.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. And that brings us right to 3 p.m. on my clock. So I want to thank both Dan Abreu and Michael Little for the presentation today. We will be forwarding the slides to all people who registered. I know we had several questions on that, and then we'll also make sure you have the links that were posted in the session today. And then finally, as I mentioned, as you close out the session, you'll be directed to a SurveyMonkey evaluation. So if you could take a moment and respond to that, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you participate in future events.